If you want to break a human being completely, you don't need to torture them. You just need to convince them that every single breath their child takes is a data point they must flawlessly control. Right now, in thousands of homes across the world, there is a locked bathroom door. Inside, the shower is running on full blast. But no one is bathing. The water is only turned on to muffle the sound of a mother, or a father, sobbing into a towel. Meet Sarah and Mark. Before they had their daughter, they were highly successful, deeply rational people. They managed teams. They hit quarterly goals. So when they saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, they did what any modern, hyper-competent couple would do. They opened a fresh spreadsheet. They were determined to get parenting right. Not just okay. Perfect. They downloaded the tracking apps. They mapped out infant sleep cycles with the precision of a military operation. They stocked their pantry with expensive purees scientifically engineered to maximize cognitive development, and they memorized every single script, phrase, and boundary associated with modern gentle parenting. Their baby's life was instantly optimized down to the millisecond. If her awake window exceeded exactly 90 minutes, a digital alarm went off. If she dropped a fraction of a percentile in weight, it triggered a full-scale operational review. This is the modern cult of perfect parenting. Never before in human history have we known so much about child development. We know the exact ambient temperature required to induce deep, restorative delta wave sleep. We know the precise neurological impact of raised voices. We have successfully quantified childhood. We have turned raising a human being into a high-stakes corporate project, complete with performance metrics, daily analytics, and zero margin for error. To the optimized parent, a tantrum isn't just a tantrum anymore. It is a failure of emotional regulation protocols. A missed nap isn't just a minor inconvenience, it is a neurological setback that threatens their child's future potential. Every minor hiccup is catastrophized into a permanent, lifelong trauma. And there is a terrifying side effect to all this optimization. Sarah hasn't slept more than 3 consecutive hours in 8 months. Not because her baby is awake, but because she is lying in the dark, staring at a glowing graph on her phone, terrified that she miscalculated a sleep cycle. Mark walks through the front door after a long day at work and his chest instantly tightens. He isn't coming home to a warm, messy family. He is clocking into a second shift at a high-pressure infant development lab. They haven't had a real conversation in weeks. They communicate entirely in shift changes and data transfers. She ate 4 ounces. She slept for 42 minutes. I validated her big feelings about the green cup. They are deeply exhausted. They are quietly resentful. The air in their home is thick with an unbearable, suffocating hypervigilance. Sitting on the cold tiles of that locked bathroom, listening to the rushing water, Sarah is paralyzed by a single, agonizing thought. They followed all the manuals. They bought the organic food. They logged every ounce of milk and they never, ever raised their voices. They thought they were doing everything exactly right. But they were about to discover that the very tools they were using to build a flawless childhood were actually destroying their family from the inside out. For thousands of years, raising a child was a biological reality. It was messy, chaotic, community-driven, and largely improvised. You kept them fed, you kept them warm, and you hoped for the best. But somewhere in the last decade, a silent shift occurred. We stopped raising children and started managing them. Think about the apps on a modern parent's phone. They look exactly like the analytical dashboards used by Fortune 500 executives to track global supply chains. Sleep is charted on color-coded bar graphs. Feeding schedules are tracked with precision timers. Diaper changes are logged with drop-down menus detailing color, consistency, and volume. For Sarah and Mark, this data was supposed to be their armor. If they could just track enough metrics, they could protect their daughter from the terrifying unpredictability of human life. But data is a merciless master. When the app declared their daughter was supposed to be in deep REM sleep by 7:15 p.m., but she was still wide awake and babbling at 7:30, it wasn't just a late bedtime. To Sarah, it was a systemic failure. Her heart rate would spike. Cortisol would flood her bloodstream. She would pace the dark hallway, rocking a perfectly content baby, paralyzed by the fear that she was irreparably damaging her child's developing brain. And then there was the psychological optimization. The philosophy of gentle parenting began as a beautiful, compassionate idea: treat children with respect, validate their emotions, and avoid harsh punishments. But in the hands of a hyper-optimized, anxiety-driven culture, it was quickly weaponized. It transformed into a terrifying, rigid script that parents felt they had to execute flawlessly. If their toddler threw a heavy wooden block at Mark's head, he couldn't just react with normal human frustration. He had to instantly suppress his own nervous system. He had to drop to eye level, maintain a completely neutral facial expression, and deliver a perfectly calibrated, trauma-informed response. I see you are feeling frustrated. I cannot let you throw blocks. Blocks are for building. It sounds ideal. But imagine doing that 50 times a day, on 3 hours of sleep, while actively suppressing your own exhaustion, anger, and basic humanity. You are no longer a parent. You are a customer service representative for a tiny, irrational dictator. This constant, suffocating pressure to be emotionally flawless stripped Sarah and Mark of their authenticity. They became terrified of their own natural reactions. They spent their rare free evenings endlessly debriefing the day's interactions, agonizing over whether they had accidentally traumatized their daughter because Sarah sighed too loudly during a tantrum. Their home became a sterile emotional environment, deliberately stripped of natural friction. They were entirely hollowed out. They were running on fumes, sustained only by the desperate belief that this relentless optimization would guarantee a perfectly happy, well-adjusted child. But the human brain is not a supply chain. It cannot be managed on a spreadsheet. At their daughter's 18-month checkup, Sarah sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, clutching her heavy binder of sleep and feeding logs. She was ready to present her pristine data to the pediatrician. But the doctor didn't look at the binder. She looked at Sarah. She saw the trembling hands, the hollowed, dark-circled eyes, and the terrifying, brittle tension radiating from this mother who was holding herself together by a single, fraying thread. They had successfully tracked every ounce of milk, scheduled every biological function, and shielded their baby from every possible negative emotion. So why did their pediatrician just hand them a referral to a psychiatric crisis center? The referral wasn't for their daughter. It was for Sarah. The pediatrician hadn't seen a thriving, perfectly optimized family. She had seen a mother dangerously close to a total psychological break, and a father who was fading into a hollow ghost of his former self. The car ride home was completely silent. For the first time in 18 months, the tracking app on Sarah's phone remained unopened. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the deafening, heavy quiet of a structure finally collapsing under its own impossible weight. That night, the breaking point arrived. It started over something painfully trivial. A misplaced water cup. Their daughter began to whine, the pitch slowly escalating into a full-blown, thrashing toddler meltdown. Usually, this was the moment the emergency protocol kicked in. This was the exact second Mark would drop to his knees, completely neutralize his facial expressions, and recite the carefully rehearsed script. This was when Sarah would expertly manage the environment to reduce all sensory input. But this time, neither of them moved. Sarah stood in the center of the kitchen, staring blankly at the floor. Mark leaned against the counter, his eyes heavy, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. The screaming echoed off the walls, bouncing off the organic puree jars and the meticulously organized, color-coded sensory bins. "Say the words, Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Do the script." Mark looked at his wife. He looked at his red-faced, crying child. And something inside him simply snapped. "I can't," he said, his voice cracking with a raw, terrifying honesty. I have absolutely nothing left to give." He walked out of the kitchen. Sarah didn't chase him. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, sobbing just as hard as her daughter. The immaculate system had failed. Their marriage, which had previously survived career changes, cross-country moves, and intense financial stress, was now fracturing under the unbearable, crushing pressure of trying to be flawless. They had treated their family like a corporate merger, and now they were entirely emotionally bankrupt. For a year and a half, they had swallowed every human instinct. They had stifled every moment of natural, healthy frustration and forced themselves to act like perfectly regulated robots. They believed that if they never showed stress, their child would never feel stress. They honestly believed they could spreadsheet their way out of human suffering. But as Sarah sat on that cold kitchen floor, listening to the agonizing sound of her family falling apart, a terrifying realization washed over her. The optimization hadn't protected their daughter. It had only isolated her from the real, authentic versions of her parents. They were deeply, dangerously burnt out. In their desperate attempt to cultivate a perfect, frictionless environment, they had turned their home into a pressure cooker of unspoken, radioactive anxiety. The data couldn't save them. The gentle parenting scripts felt like ash in their mouths. The system hadn't broken because they missed a step or forgot to log a sleep cycle. It broke because of a massive, fundamental lie at the core of modern parenting, a lie almost all of us still blindly believe today. Here is the massive, fundamental lie of modern parenting. We believe that if we can create a perfectly frictionless environment, our children will grow up happy, secure, and resilient. We think our job is to act as a human shock absorber, taking every single impact of life so our kids never feel a thing. It is a beautifully intentioned, incredibly dangerous fiction. If you ask any elite developmental psychologist, they will tell you a shocking truth: a flawless parent is actually a biological disadvantage. To understand why, you have to understand a psychological concept called rupture and repair. A rupture is a moment of friction. It is the moment you lose your patience because you are running on 3 hours of sleep. It is the moment you say no a little too sharply, or sigh a little too heavily. To the hyper-optimized parent, a rupture is a catastrophic failure. It is a terrifying deviation from the script that must be avoided at all costs. But to a developing human brain, that rupture is an absolute necessity. Because what builds a resilient child isn't the absence of a rupture. It is the magic of the repair. It is the moment a deeply imperfect parent gets down on their child's level, authentically human, and says, "I am so sorry. I lost my temper because I was feeling overwhelmed. That was my fault. I love you, and we are okay." If a child never sees you struggle, they never learn how to recover. If you raise them in a sterile, perfectly managed emotional terrarium, the very first time they experience real, unavoidable friction in the outside world, they will shatter. By hiding every ounce of their exhaustion and frustration, Sarah and Mark weren't protecting their daughter. They were accidentally depriving her of the exact psychological immune system she would need to survive a complicated world. And there was another hidden danger they hadn't accounted for. Children are human tuning forks. They do not listen to your carefully rehearsed scripts. They feel your central nervous system. When Mark was dropping to his knees and reciting his perfectly calibrated gentle parenting phrases, he thought he was projecting safety. But his daughter didn't feel safe. She felt the terrifying, unspoken dissonance between his flawlessly calm words and his radiating, high-frequency anxiety. You can fake a script, but you cannot fake a regulated nervous system. The realization hit Sarah like a freight train. Children do not need project managers. They do not need data analysts. They do not need every millisecond of their existence tracked, quantified, and optimized. They desperately need authentic human beings. They need parents who are allowed to be messy, allowed to fail, and willing to apologize. They need to see that you can experience negative emotions and still survive them. The heavy, suffocating spell of perfect parenting was finally broken. The illusion was shattered. Knowing the science was one thing. But could two deeply burnt out, data-obsessed perfectionists actually do the terrifying work of deleting the spreadsheets, letting go of the wheel, and risking the one thing they feared most? The next morning, the house was quiet. Sarah sat at the kitchen table holding her phone. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the sleep tracking app she had consulted 40 times a day for a year and a half. Her chest tightened with a familiar, terrifying spike of anxiety. If she didn't log the data, how would she know her child was okay? She took a slow, deep breath. She pressed her thumb against the glass, holding it there until the little icon began to shake. And then, she hit delete. When Mark walked into the kitchen, she didn't give him a data report. She didn't tell him how many ounces of milk were consumed or how many minutes of deep sleep had been achieved. She just looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, and said, "I'm done." Mark walked over to the recycling bin and dropped the heavy, meticulously organized binder of feeding schedules straight into the trash. They did not become perfect parents that day. In fact, they became profoundly, wonderfully messy ones. The first time their daughter threw a massive tantrum over a blue plate, Mark didn't drop to his knees and recite a robotic script. He was tired. He was frustrated. He sighed loudly, rubbed his temples, and said, "I am really annoyed right now. We are using the blue plate." His daughter cried. But for the very first time, the air in the room didn't feel radioactive. It just felt real. Later that afternoon, Mark sat on the floor with her, looked her in the eye, and apologized for snapping. He showed her what a human being looks like when they make a mistake and take accountability for it. He didn't just teach her about the world, he gave her a roadmap for how to survive it. Slowly, the color began to return to their lives. The suffocating tension drained out of the house. Sarah started sleeping again, not because the baby's schedule was flawless, but because Sarah was no longer lying awake guarding against imaginary catastrophes. By letting go of the desperate need to optimize their child, they finally had the energy to actually connect with her. And a miraculous thing happened. As Sarah and Mark's nervous systems finally settled, their daughters did, too. She hadn't needed a flawless environment. She had just needed parents who were okay. If you are watching this, and your phone is full of tracking apps, and your heart is pounding with the fear that you are somehow ruining your child because you aren't perfectly gentle, perfectly patient, or perfectly scheduled, hear this. Your child does not want a project manager. They want you. The messy, tired, authentic, incredibly loving version of you. The version of you that gets it wrong, apologizes, and tries again tomorrow. You finally have absolute permission to put down the clipboard, delete the tracking apps, and just be human. But the real question is, who are you going to be when you do?